take the perception of quote unquote trustworthiness, right? What people think makes a face look trustworthy. Based on prior studies, we knew we would be looking for things like smiling, things like femininity. People seem to think more feminine faces are more trustworthy. But one thing that stood out to me when I looked at the transformations was eye gaze matters, as in where is the face looking? And if you want to look more trustworthy, you look into the camera, you look into the person's eyes. If you want to look less so, you look away. So sometimes surprising features drive these things. And also because this is so data rich, you also get information about the background too. So you want to have a nice, vibrant, colorful background behind you compared to a dim sort of background. If everybody is going one way, there's a feeling and a sense that it's better to go with the herd. And that is often not true in today's world. So think about where the herd is going and think about how you can go orthogonal to the herd or in a different direction and still make it work out. You don't want to be in a position where you have to be the best in a hugely crowded field. You will never be the best in that hugely crowded field. I will never be the best in even my tiny little crowded field. What you want to be is different, right? So imagine a sea of lanterns, right, at night. You don't want to try to be the brightest lantern. You want to be the lantern that's colored purple, right? You are going to stand out. That's going to capture attention. How can you be the purple light amidst the sea of yellow ones?
All right, everyone, good day. My guest today is Dr. Stefan Uddenberg, or Dr. Stefan Uddenberg in America. He's a principal researcher at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and he did his PhD in cognitive psychology at Yale University. Did I get that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we both went to school together. We have a lot of interesting things to talk about when it comes to, let's say, bias or generating faces or understanding maybe how you are judged by different factors. That's a fantastic topic of research. So take it away, Dr. Uddenberg. Tell us about your research.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here. Good to see your face after, gosh, I don't even know how many years. It's been dog's years. Last I saw you would have been close to when we graduated, I think in 2006.
Yes, we did not look like this when we last saw each other.
We did not, but you're still looking great. And it's good to see you. Yeah, so I mean, broadly speaking, I study how we see and remember and think about things out in the wider world, but with a special focus on social perception. How do we see, think about, and remember one another? And when you're doing that with people, right, when you think about, say, your mom, think about your friend, you're not thinking of their elbows, you're not thinking of their shoulders, you're thinking about their face often. That's what comes to mind, at least for those of us with some semblance of visual imagery, right? Aphantasics aside. And people make judgments about other people on the basis of their face all the time. Decisions about who should we trust, who should we buy from, just constantly, perhaps irresistibly, automatically, and very, very quickly. For anything that you can think of, could be major demographic properties like age, could be more subjective properties like how dominant someone looks or how smart someone looks. For anything that you could think of, we pick up on those impressions, or we make those impressions in the blink of an eye, meaning that I could flash a face at you for just 50 milliseconds, and you've already extracted all the visual information you're going to use to make that judgment. And showing you that face for longer is not really going to budge things, at least when we're talking about photographs. And these kinds of impressions matter. They matter a great deal because, for example, CEOs that look more competent to other people make more money, even if they aren't actually more competent by various metrics of competence. These kinds of impressions are important for sentencing decisions by judges in real high-stakes criminal cases. Cadets that look more dominant end up being promoted at higher rates and getting to higher military ranks. And we think that these kinds of impressions can be misleading. So because these kinds of impressions can be misleading in the ways that we talked about, especially for like CEOs who look more competent, earning more, we think it's important to understand where these impressions are coming from, what are the features that are driving them, and how can we combat these biases in society. So to that end, we create computational models of faces, of face impressions. And we use them in a variety of different kinds of studies to help us understand and combat these biases, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. That does make sense. And I think for those listening, as you think about maybe how you're judged on how you look for different opportunities that you may come upon, I think this is an important topic for the future because we'll be interacting with more and more AI systems that will either prejudge you or inform the person who is making a decision some inherent information about your capabilities for whatever decision process that's happening. So this is interesting. What got you started in this research?
I fell into it, as with many things. For those who know ML or computer science, I feel like my entire career has been a process of like, gradient descent in a way, almost operating by like a greedy kind of algorithm where I didn't have like a grand plan, right? I just optimized for whatever made sense at the time. So like you, I'm from Trinidad. I'm not sure actually how you ended up I'd be so curious to catch up after this and find out your journey. But after graduating high school, I was adrift. I wasn't sure what to do, in part because the opportunities available to my friends were not available to me. So you know that when you graduate from CIC, a lot of your friends go on to school either in Canada or the UK. Most would go to Canada or the UK. The reason being that Canada and the UK provide excellent education. It's familiar to us. They accept our credentials. And the sticker price is a lot lower than the US. But it is still exorbitantly high, or at least it was exorbitantly high circa 2006 for me. So I didn't have the money to go to Canada or the UK. And I certainly didn't have the money to go to the US, to the kinds of schools that usually take us. And I knew I didn't want to stay in Trinidad just because I felt boxed in by career. So when you're in Trinidad and you're with your parents and everything, everybody wants you to either be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And very early on, I ruled out those possibilities just because I wasn't interested in it. It's not because I couldn't do it. I did fine in school, but I wasn't interested in those career paths. So I took a year off. I taught math as a private lessons teacher, which is something that you could do in Trinidad. You could teach privately. And I studied like crazy. I learned the SAT. I read all the books on how to get into schools over here in the States. And it was apparent that the only option for me was like the US or bust, because there were no schools in Canada and the UK that were going to give me a scholarship to go. So I had to find schools in the US that would give me scholarships to go. And only like a handful of the best schools in the States do that. So it was really, for me, with the options that I had and I thought of that I would be okay with, it was either that or bust. Fortunately, that worked out because I took a year off to do that while teaching. And then I came to Dartmouth. I ended up at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. And that was a complete culture shock, as you could imagine. Cold no ras, yes. As we'd say. But it was okay. I'd never handled the heat super well in Trinidad. And I took to the cold well. I got to learn to ski there.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
I'm one of the few Trinidadians, I guess, that knows how to ski now.
Yeah, I don't know how to ski.
So I went there and I ended up majoring in cognitive science and Japanese studies. I fell into Japanese as well in a way because they force you to do a second language there. And I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to know that I could do something hard. So I picked that up and I fell in love with it. I came this close to actually migrating to Japan. But for various reasons, that didn't quite work out. So I went into cognitive science. And I ended up in cognitive science, again, by process of elimination, because I really liked all these different classes I was taking on computer science and psychology and linguistics, and I couldn't pick between a lot of them. And it turns out that cognitive science was a major that lets you just keep taking all of those classes, and it's kind of like a build your own major situation. So I did that. And then I was able to start doing research because the school had funds. Normally when you do research in the social sciences, you don't get paid for it. It's all volunteer. I couldn't afford to not make money. So fortunately, the school had like a program called the Presidential Scholars Program, where if you were doing well in school, they would pay for you to do research once you could find a faculty sponsor. So I did that. I started off working with monkey data, monkey neural data. And I had to build like a classifier in MATLAB circa 2000. You mean
monkey brain imaging or brain signal data, correct?
Yeah, exactly, right? Where they would do surgery on a monkey and put an electrode in its brain, or a series of electrodes, I should say. And you've got like real neural spiking data to analyze. And I was responsible for like writing a classifier for that from scratch, because it was 2008. There were no packages to do this stuff. It was an awesome experience in retrospect. I didn't even know what I was doing at the time. And my code ran so slowly and it took forever to make and to run, but it was a lot of fun. But then I ended up leaving that lab and moving to vision. I got really inspired by a class on visual perception, or perception more generally, by Peter Tse. So I wanted to do vision science from then on. And from there, I was off to the races. I did my thesis in that with Won Mok Shim. I stayed as a lab manager for a couple of years there at Dartmouth, working with her. Then I went to grad school at Yale with Brian Scholl and had a great time. Then I did my postdoc at Princeton with Alex Todorov, now in like Faces. And then I moved with him to Chicago. So I'm here at Chicago Booth because he got recruited to Chicago Booth. So riding on his coattails, I was able to come here. And then next year I'll get to finally be a professor at the University of Illinois.
So next year, August 2024, you would have completed the first major milestone in academic journey
Yes.
is becoming a professor.
Yes, that's exactly right. I would finally have begun my journey. come next year.
Why did you do your PhD? I often ask people who do PhDs, like I've done one, I know why I did it. I often find that people who actually want to do one, I'm fascinated and almost estranged at them as to why they would want to do that. So why did you want to do yours?
Again, process of elimination. So when you go to somewhere like Dartmouth, most of your peers go on to become consultants or people in finance, right? This is circa 2010, 2011. This is before big tech really became big tech. And now everybody wants to go work at Facebook or Google or Microsoft. But I didn't want to go be a consultant. I didn't want to do Wall Street and work at Goldman. And if you're foreign, it also limits your options too, right? If you're on an F1 visa, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So by process of elimination, with my proclivities and my style and my way of thinking and being, academia made sense, because different industries let you optimize for different things, right? If you want to optimize for money, you go into finance or consulting. If you want to optimize for meaning, you go into social work or teaching. But if you want to optimize for freedom of inquiry, for the ability to wake up each morning and decide what you're going to work on, I think academia doesn't have that beat. Although it comes at a cost, right? One of my favorite quotes about academia is, in no other career, will you get to choose which 7 days of the week you work. Because you're constantly working. It doesn't shut off, but it's because the work is your life in a sense.
Yeah, and we were just having a discussion about how I think professors are actually entrepreneurs to a degree, because you have to go get funding. You have to continuously push yourself within your field to differentiate yourself against your competition. You have to continuously put out papers, aka your products as an academic. You have to have employees. You typically get very cheap employees. Better yet, if they're international students and they have to work, otherwise they get deported. So they work really hard, like myself and yourself. That's a tough journey, man. Very tough journey.
Yeah, I haven't chosen the easiest journey. If anything, I've chosen much more difficult steps than were perhaps strictly necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
but
so,
what I
how
enjoy.
would you, as you stumble upon your research, how did that evolve? So the first, you mentioned you took a class and you started getting into attention and then visual attention. Describe what that is for the audience and sort of the significance of that, especially in machine learning.
Oh, yeah. So in perception, you could think of attention as what turns looking something into seeing it, right? You may have experienced this when your eyes are staring straight ahead at your screen at a particular thing, but you're not paying attention to it, so you don't end up seeing it. You don't process it. It doesn't come into awareness. You don't know what's going on. You're just zoned out, right? Attention is what lets you zone in. In machine learning, I actually would defer to you because I am I'm the sort of person that uses the tools and the insights of machine learning to study my problems of psychological interest, but I'm not a machine learning researcher. I'm not someone that generates new algorithms from scratch to say this is a brand new way of processing data, or of modeling cognition or something. I'm more the kind of person that says, "Ooh, that's a cool thing right there. Let's see if we can use that to answer some questions of psychological insight." So how would you define attention in learning context?
I would think,
Attention is all you need.
yeah, I think, well, repeating the word, it's the way that you end up paying attention. I like the way that you posed it in terms of focusing in on what is actually necessary. And then I think this notion of attention changes between text and image. So the idea is, in order to answer the current question that some model is trying to answer, what particular pieces of information are important for it to focus on? And how do you determine, let's say in the visual sense, that is a spatial set of information typically. And there's the spatial aspect, like where different pixels are located. There's also the actual color information you might be getting depending on the different types of features. Oftentimes in text, it's literally the position of a token or a word and how those positions relate to each other. That broadening of connections and how those things relate to each other, how those different pieces of information relate to each other, are sort of connected through this thing called the attention mechanism. And it's interesting that visual perception got you very interested, because that was kind of my journey into a lot of machine learning stuff as well. So a majority of my PhD research was 2D and 3D shape matching. So what all that means is that given the geometry, given literally a point cloud, so like I have a shape of a dog and I have a shape of my hand, I have no other information. I have no color. I just have a bunch of dots that someone drew, let's say on a flat page. I need to recognize that object given its geometry, and to determine strictly based off of geometry how one object is different to another. And these are very important subsystems and visual systems. So before, I think a lot of the deep learning things came along, people would solve this problem in a component fashion. So I'll have a point cloud detector. So I'll take an image, I'll generate a point cloud, and then now given a point cloud a bunch of dots, think of it as the overall shape, I can tell, I can recognize certain patterns based off of the shape of an object, right? So I imagine in your research, the shape of someone's face has some bearing on masculinity, probably age, probably ethnicity as well. So this notion of shape is kind of universal in vision. So I'd worked on some of that. So it gets interesting now in your realm, where I think in some of the demos that you showed me, you are now generating faces based off of, well, first we generate a face, and now given a face and particular attributes, such as age, gender, etc., I can now modulate that face to align more to those different attributes. How have you seen? What conclusions have you drawn from that type of research?
So that's an interesting way to put it. What conclusions have we drawn? The nature of that work is really a launching point. So it's actually not a series of conclusions, it's a series of beginnings. So the point of that work was that I came to this with a problem. The problem that I had as a cognitive psychologist who also works on questions inspired by social psychology, where you want to understand how people think about one another. In order to study how people judge faces, you need to use faces, right? You need to use pictures of faces. And where do you get those pictures from? Well, broadly speaking, there were two ways to do that. One way is to use computational models of faces at the time, which the best examples thereof were from my advisor's own lab, Todorov's group. And I haven't shown you those, but those basically those are super evocative. They are made with much the same kinds of underlying techniques as I showed you, but they don't look very real. They look like PlayStation 2 era mannequins with bald heads on black backgrounds. So you can manipulate the face to look more whatever you want. And it does do that. But no one is ever going to be fooled that this is a real person.
Okay.
And so they might be judging it a little differently, or you may not be able to do certain types of studies. The other approach that you have is to use real people's faces. So every year, there's a new set of databases that come out where psychologists or economists or whoever take a bunch of take a bunch of pictures of volunteers of various types of, with various degrees of racial diversity and gender diversity and what have you. But there's never enough faces for the research that you want. The faces are taken with very different kinds of, between databases, they're taken with very different photography mechanisms. There's never enough emotional diversity, like in the faces. So there's a lot of neutral faces in there. And when people try to get emotions, it's like regular people trying to pretend as if they're happy or sad or something. So they're not genuine expressions. So you gain realism, but you lose control. You lose the ability to figure out what exactly is driving people's judgments in some respects. So I wanted to sort of have the best of both worlds. I wanted realistic faces that you could control to a great degree computationally. Oh, and I should say the other aspect of real faces of people with dignity. So there was just a tweet last night actually by a woman called Rona Wang, where she said, you could see it. Imagine that you wake up one morning and find that psychologists used your face as an example of what is an ugly face, right? And she showed this picture from this paper showing like the face of someone and the rating of attractiveness of that face by people, yes. Right? So there are concerns about privacy and dignity of the people involved in these studies. So I wanted to have super realistic faces that you could control computationally that sidestep these issues of privacy and dignity because they're not real people. And they never have been and they never will be. So that's where our stuff came from. It blossomed into this tool that we could use to now study other phenomena of interest to us without having to sacrifice quality or privacy. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so you essentially you can generate as much training data as you need for testing different hypotheses, right?
Correct. Yeah. That's exactly right. And, sometimes surprising features drive these things. So like, for example, if we go back to your question about conclusions, take the perception of quote unquote trustworthiness, right? What people think makes a face look trustworthy. Based on prior studies, we knew we would be looking for things like smiling, things like femininity. People seem to think more feminine faces look more trustworthy. But one thing that stood out to me when I looked at the transformations was eye gaze matters, as in where is the face looking? And if you want to look more trustworthy, you look into the camera, you look into the person's eyes. If you want to look less so, you look away, you scowl. So sometimes surprising features drive these things. And also because this is so data rich, you also get information about the background too. So you want to have a nice, vibrant, colorful background behind you compared to a dim sort of background, dim drab background.
So what you're saying is if you meet me in an alley versus you meeting me on the beach, you'd think that I'm more trustworthy because I'm on the beach.
Correct. Context matters too. Yeah.
How much do you think smell matters in
That's
real
an
world?
excellent question. I've always wanted to do a study with that. Actually, I had a conversation last year with a guy that does work on smell. I would love to know. I would love to know about all of that, right? Because that's a big thing. People will wear perfumes, and they like. I think it probably does matter, but that is untouched as far as I know.
Yeah, one thing I'm noticing in like the tech industry is you meet different maybe founders and things like that are very sort of sensitive to odors and smells and things like that. And between hygiene and odor, like body odor, it's very distinct, as if like that's maybe not as important. But and it's for folks who are like somewhat luminaries in the field. And I joked with a VC about it. I was like, is it a thing where the more successful someone is as like a CEO or something, like the worse that they smell or the more their breath smell? He's like, yeah, that kind of comes with the territory. And I was like, what? That it kind of shocked me, to be honest. Because it was interesting because, like these people, they're just gunning for it. Right. And, you putting on some perfume or you double checking your breath when you're speaking to someone that's not top of mind. You're just getting shit done, bringing shit into reality at such a high pace that I don't know if it's a difference in awareness, but I got interested in the whole smell factor in terms of how people start to perceive you, right?
That's super interesting. I wonder if that could be a case of counter signaling. If you're familiar with signaling,
no.
The idea being that, so for example, if you want to signal that you are wealthy, you wear fancy clothes and you wear a Rolex watch and stuff, right?
Yes.
Counter signaling is the idea that once you get past a certain point of, say, wealth, you no longer need to do that. And you could do the opposite. You could be Mark Zuckerberg in a plain gray t-shirt and not wear a Rolex.
Right.
So if I wanted to signal excellence with odor, I might have to put on all kinds of perfumes and the like. But once I get to a level of excellence in my career or something, I can counter signal and just intentionally play that down.
Shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I'm always. Yeah, I think when you're coming up and you're looking for opportunities, you try to remove any factors for someone not choosing you for an opportunity. And for me, one, I'm always surprised at how much people have sort of like bad mouth odor, and bad might just be bad for me, but might be cool for them and their significant others. So that might just be a personal problem. And then body odor as well. And very much similar to your research, I'm always conducting experiments in my mind because as I study different people and their sort of arcs and trajectories, you are trying to look at different features of these people and seeing what features sort of open different doors. So this is very interesting research that you're doing. Another thing that came into mind was, how do you think, so exposure to different faces, let's say, exposure to different faces builds your overall internal mental model of, let's focus on trustworthiness. All right. So as I interact with my parents over time or my friends, I'm building up, let's say, a positive training data set of trustworthiness. I meet random strangers, someone who fights me, blah, blah, blah. They now get labeled as untrustworthy. And I sort of go through the world labeling faces as I interact. So in our generation, we didn't have a lot of media. I think we only started getting media probably in our teenage years. How do you now think the internal mental models are of the children in this age that have media and they can see so many more faces over the same period of time?
I think the media is rough for them, right? Because the nature of that media has changed. It's social media, it's TikTok, it's filters, it's people that have gone to extreme lengths to curate their appearance, advertising, it's all kinds of things. So I'll speak to two things there. The first is that I think that the media creates an unrealistic set of expectations for people, for children, especially young girls. We're seeing this borne out in the mental health data of these demographics in particular, especially like it correlates well with social media use. But in terms of as you said, you go through life labeling things. I think it's in a way both dumber and simpler than that. So there's this hypothesis. One of the leading hypotheses for why is it that we go about labeling faces as trustworthy or whatever have you, based on how they look, is called the overgeneralization hypothesis. And what that means is you overgeneralize from information you know to be true. So for example, take babies, right? A baby is not a particularly competent or dominant creature, right? A baby is not going to order you to do things. A baby can't force you to do things. A baby is not particularly knowledgeable. So when you see an adult with a face that looks kind of babyish, right, they're baby-faced, you are going to overgeneralize and think, that person is in some ways more baby-like. So there's a lot of work with baby-faced individuals. And that can have counterintuitive effects, right? Where if you are someone that is treated that way, treated more childlike over the course of your life, you could imagine that makes you yourself more childlike. But in fact, it's the opposite. These people end up becoming a little bit tougher and more resilient and self-efficacious as a consequence of people treating them so differently, underestimated. So it can have counterintuitive consequences, and we're not sure what the ultimate outcomes would be, right? Because if you just look like an untrustworthy person because your face resembles an angry face just naturally, then maybe you end up being less trustworthy over the course of your life in a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Or you could be like the baby-faced individuals and actually try your hardest to be even more kind and good to others around you. So we're not sure about all of that.
Yeah, this topic is quite interesting because I could see this being used by ad agencies. And I think we're coming into a world, this will be the first year where we're seeing AI-generated ad content. More or less, it's on the image level now. I think by next year, we'll see very strong elements of video coming. So I think research like yours in terms of, hey, I'm running this ad for this particular type of car. I want it to look this kind of sexy. I want it to look this degree of feminine, but maybe not so trustworthy because, I don't know, it's a very aggressive sports car and you want to look like a badass, whatever the case may be. And now I can now modulate a lot of these generators to inject emotion into that generation process. What's your thoughts on the future of advertising with this type of technology?
Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail on the head there. I think it's going to become much more personalized as well. So the unit of analysis is not just going to be the general public or even the particular demographic slice. The unit of analysis may well become you. What do you like to see? What is a product that you yourself could design, that you would buy, that you would wear, that you would drive? So that's where I see things going, and that can be done very deliberately, where we can ask you a series of questions like, would you prefer X or Y on a scale of 0 to 100? Would you like this thing? Or it could be done implicitly, right? So for example, I think of companies that have enormous amounts of training data on this, right? Like think like Amazon. Amazon has your entire purchase history, right? So these are things that you have decided you would buy. It has your entire viewing history. These are all the products that you looked at on your journey towards buying that thing. And it also has the negation of that too. It has the things that showed up on your search bar, right? Or at least in the search screen that you didn't even click on. So you've got like 3 levels of engagement with that content. And I think that you could use those to now generate new products or to modify existing products to be more desirable to consumers. I think eventually, if you could get crazy 3D printing and individualized manufacturing going on. You could make, for example, a shoe that's just for you, that is like your favorite kind of shoe.
Mm-hmm.
But we're probably a far way off from that. So it'll be more. I think it'll become more atomized, right? So as we go along, but maybe the next step would be sort of more specific demographic groups, right? Like 30 to 45-year-old Trinidadian males in Chicago or something. But yeah.
You mentioned in a different podcast that people don't know what race you are. So like what's your ethnicity? Like what are you mixed up with?
I am mixed up with white and black of various types.
Okay.
But when people look at me, the term I use now is when people ask me that, they ask me what race are you, and I just tell them out group.
Out group?
Because I tell them out group because it's like everyone's out group. Because, white people don't think I'm white, black people don't think I'm black. A lot of people think I'm Indian. They will look at me.
Yeah, a little bit of Indian, but like for me from home, like I would probably put you more on the white spectrum than the Indian spectrum. Mm-hmm. And then, but so your mom's side was of African descent or Caucasian descent?
Mixed. My mom is mixed.
Okay, mom is mixed.
And then her parents are also mixed to some degree.
Oh wow! So you're like,
so I'm like
multiple levels
at least mixed. Yeah, like I'm a product of the Caribbean. There's nowhere else that I could have been made. With 8 generations of interracial marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm like 3rd or 4th generation mixed. But when you go up to my great grandparents, they become unequivocally black, for example.
Okay, yeah, because I have African, Portuguese, whatever Portuguese is, Chinese and Indian, and that's kind of like my composition. But naturally, I think people might classify me as probably on the Indian side because I think that's where my sort of hair growth came from for the most part.
But you're in Florida, right? Like, I mean, everybody must think you're Cuban over there, right?
Yeah, it depends on what location, what your beard looks like. People see my calves and they're like, okay, you're not Indian. Like, that's where your Chinese came from. So I don't know. It's interesting. And I bring this up because I think as we navigate the world, we're often put into boxes. And the boxes are defined by the people in that region and what they're exposed to. And it's very interesting that your research, I think, will start to expand the boxes to a degree. But it will also maybe even shrink the boxes. Like, this is my own world. This is all I know, because it's a completely tailored world for me, which is exciting as well, I think, to a degree.
No, you're right. I wonder as well about like the atomization of the world with generative AI, right? When you can start to have music that is tailored to you, right? Like that is generated just for you. And only you listen to that. Could end up into these hyper specific content niches where like there's no mass media anymore, right? It's not like the 1960s where everyone listens to the Beatles. Now you're looking at a world where you listen to your particular brand of acid trance, psy, techno stuff, and nobody else does, because nobody else has heard the particular point in latent space that you exist at,
So you said latent space. What is that, for anyone listening who's not in machine learning, what is the latent? How would you describe the latent space?
The latent space is, think of a song, right? You could describe a song in a lot of different ways in terms of its pace, beats per minute, in terms of its genre, rock versus rap versus whatever. A latent space is a way of turning all those different descriptors into points in a space. So it becomes a matter of geometry at that point. And once you do that, you can interpolate smoothly between different points in the space, right? So you can morph now between a song being rap to a song being country. It's just like, I think about this in terms of face space, but it's just a way of thinking about how things relate to one another, about how content relates to one another. such that you could uniformly interpolate between them and extrapolate even, right? So you could say, what would happen if we turn the rap aspect of the song up to 11? What would that mean? What would that look like? Is that a way that you would describe it? How would you?
Yeah, I think about it probably more visually. So for those that are listening, like all of these machine learning systems, they're all built on this concept of linear algebra. And linear algebra, think of the graphs that you used to draw in math class in high school, where you had to draw coordinates, some x and y coordinate. So each x and y coordinate is some feature. And in a lot of these machine learning systems, there are hundreds or thousands of features that describe the actual object. So if we were to put my face in a latent space, it'll probably put me to the region where more Indian. If they were to put Stefan's face, it'll probably push it probably somewhere Indian, but maybe slightly in the Caucasian, in that type of region. And now what gets interesting is if we know information, we can now manipulate that space. So we now know that Stefan has heritage from the African region, which means we'll actually push him in that. If we were to classify him in that space of where we would place him, we could push him down to that region. And now he has a new representation in that space. And we could probably generate a face of what would my face and his face look like together. So that's sort of the latent space. And I think it'll become more and more important for a lot of the content that we end up consuming. Basically, like whoever is able to control this thing called the latent space or have very good representation of, the latent space that I prefer, they can generate very good content for me. Another interesting thing that you might find is someone on the internet was saying that we will move away from searching on Google. If large language models answer all of our questions, what's the advertising in a large language model, right? All of the information is essentially coming from it. Yes, it can fetch from different sources, but this person was suggesting that each person will no longer put their content out there. Everyone will have their content behind some walled garden, and then we'll have agents that go out and sort of read the content to be like, okay, that content's actually useful for you, so I'll recommend it back to you. And it'll have these agents that search for the content that we like, because people won't give their content freely, because if you give your content freely, it'll end up in a large language model and it gets copied.
That's interesting. It's almost like automated networking, right? Like who knows who sort of situation, and automated back channeling.
Yeah, very similar to that. And the sort of personalized thing that you said, right? If I can manufacture a product specifically for you, so it's actually in line with that. So this gets very interesting. How do you feel about publishing?
Publishing as in papers?
Papers, yeah.
Publishing is great. I mean, when you can get a paper published, that's wonderful. Preparing a manuscript is pain. That is a painful process. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but I feel like a lot of papers are unnecessary window dressing on a core idea or a core set of methods or a core set of results. A lot of papers could honestly be put into a format that's like a PowerPoint or an explorable, simple Jupyter notebook, and they would actually be better off. There are some people are coming at this from another direction, right? They're saying that discussion sections should be removed from papers because they end up distracting from the message, or they try to frame the results in ways that aren't justified. So there's some people pushing for discussion sections to be abolished. I would go further and say that most of the papers could be abolished as well, and they could just become PowerPoints or interactive notebooks. Better yet, if they're interactive web-based notebooks, and you could play with the data yourself and everything.
Yeah, the reproducibility aspect coming in as well, right? Slightly better career and more of your advice. So what advice do you have for someone at home? Right, they're still in school, they're in high school, they have access to all this Gen AI technology now. We know the state of affairs at home is not sort of the best when it comes to the economy, et cetera, et cetera. What advice do you have for folks in high school thinking about what to do next?
That depends on the overall goals. But I will say that regardless of whatever your goals are, you should probably get accustomed to using the kinds of tools that we're discussing here, Gen AI tools. So to the extent possible, try to understand how LLMs work. Try to understand how you can make them work. Because understanding how to build an LLM is very different from understanding how to actually prompt it to get the results that you want out of it. Play around with these things. If you can learn to code, I think that coding is equivalent to this century as literacy was to the past umpteen 100 years. It has changed my life being able to code because it is the closest thing I think we have to magic. You can literally turn words into actions, into automated routines. You could make machines do things for you. It's pretty incredible. You could make things appear on screens, and thus have actual influence in the world outside of the world of bits and of atoms. So learn to code, learn how these AI tools work, keep an open mind as to what you want, and just always be seeking opportunities, seeking connection, seeking networks. Yeah, I'm not sure. What would your best advice be? I mean, what do you've now interviewed a bunch of people here on this podcast.
I think whatever you were taught won't hold anymore in the next 2 to 5 years. So the space of careers is rapidly expanding, and people just don't know what those careers are. People are inventing new careers as different industries shrink or shift especially because of some of these tools. I think everyone will learn more or less how to build their brand, because otherwise you technically won't be discovered in an online world. I think it is very important for people in smaller regions like ours to have a strong online network, because oftentimes you don't have the mechanism to travel physically to meet people, but you can have a global network of people that you know and trust online, and that they can open doors for you. You mightn't have to leave your particular country. And I'm very much focused on what's going to happen for the future of work, especially for younger people in our homelands, just because how many new people can the traditional industries that we have at our home continue to support? There's really not that much industry, in my opinion, that's generating, I don't know, couple 100,000 new jobs a year. That's just not happening. So what do these folks do for work? And then as you think about schooling, we both have PhDs. We've both gone through that process in the US. You've gone to, the top schools. You've gotten, so you have a tremendous amount of pedigree behind your name because of the brands that you've associated yourself with. And that gives you, to some degree, an outsized position when it comes to obtaining opportunities. So for instance, when someone thinks of hiring you, they're like, oh, Stefan has a PhD from Yale. Shit, yeah, he's trustworthy for the most part, right? Maybe. And I think that's also an interesting study as well, probably to look at these other external labels that are attached to us that we attain, and how that leads to, let's not maybe say trustworthiness. I think trustworthiness is a good factor. And then very similar to you, like coding, I feel sometimes we get caught in the trap that has played in America. So it's a veil. Everything is if you look at things from a system of slavery level, everything is a system of slavery, even till today, meaning I can enslave your mind, enslave your body, enslave your food. There are different mechanisms to control populations. But what gets very interesting is that I think the follow your passion thing is another veil. Like you're going to follow your passion in Trinidad. So you like basket weaving in Trinidad, how you're going to make a living. So there's the notion of following your passion or finding an alignment between the marketplace and what you best enjoy. Sometimes that's not always rewarding from a financial perspective. And for me, the financial aspect is always very important, just because there's always risks that come up in your life, and you having the ability to generate more financial returns or force gives you more options. So I don't look at money as like I just want a bunch of wealth. More money gives you more options. It gives you a certain amount of padding. That's why I always encourage younger people to keep that in mind, even though money might be important to you altruistically, internally, but for setting up things that you want in your life, for your family, your future family, capital is needed to fund these things. That's kind of where I think my mind gravitates towards at home, and not asking for permission. Like these systems of permissionless, what's the word?
Permissionless innovation.
Yeah, like permissionless, like code and media. I don't need someone's permission to code something. I don't need someone's permission to post something. And I can independently create value in the marketplace and see what works, see what doesn't. I think it would just be cool to see a bunch of people just trying things out, and not maybe, I think a lot of people have been held back by this notion of, I didn't get to go to college. And you were almost in that situation. You almost didn't get to go away. I was almost in that situation. Thankfully, my parents had the foresight to say, get out, because I know if I went to school in Trinidad, I would be doing probably a lot of drugs or something, because I have a very addictive personality and I would just party way too much.
There's no parties like Trinidad.
So imagine you just going to school and partying all the time. And I was fortunate enough, my father kept me away from that environment because he knew I wouldn't make it. But yeah, I think it's an interesting time. And my silent concern is that many industries at home, there's no mechanism that says you have to hire someone. There's no mechanism that says you have to employ someone. Meaning, if I could find some technology to replace half my workforce, why do I need that expense on my business? And that leaves a lot of people, I think, at home in dire straits. And both you and I are at the forefront of doing things in AI. So I think it's important to just maybe throw some things out there that could, let people know to keep reskilling and continuously trying to reskill.
Back in my day, I was funneled into being either a physician, a lawyer, or an engineer. And I didn't want to do those things. And in retrospect, I'm very glad I didn't in Trinidad, because every other child was being funneled into the same career paths by their parents. So now, having iterated that out, we have a glut of physicians, lawyers, and engineers in our generation, which means that people in our generation are having a hard time finding meaningful, remunerative work. So just think a little bit about the context you find yourself in. If everybody is going one way, there's a feeling and a sense that it's better to go with the herd. And that is often not true in today's world. So think about where the herd is going and think about how you can go orthogonal to the herd or in a different direction and still make it work out. Something that I think about a lot is people doing data science. So 10 years ago, data science was just a glint in most people's eye, right? It was just starting to become a thing. And I was like, that's where it's going to be next. But now that everybody has acknowledged that, and there's 10,000 different data science courses and certificates, now there's a glut of people trying to get into data science work. And what does that mean for them and the future of employment in this industry? And what kinds of credentials are employers going to use to differentiate potential data scientists that they could hire, right? Like, how are you going to stand out from the crowd of 20,000 other people based in America or Europe that have a Coursera certificate on your LinkedIn? So just thinking through the climate you find yourself in, you don't want to be in a position where you have to be the best in a hugely crowded field. You will never be the best in that hugely crowded field. I will never be the best in even my tiny little crowded field. What you want to be is different, right? So imagine a sea of lanterns, right, at night. You don't want to try to be the brightest lantern. You want to be the lantern that's colored purple, right? You are going to stand out. That's going to capture attention. How can you be the purple light amidst the sea of yellow ones?
That's a good. Okay, that's going at the front of the episode. That was a clean. I like that. I like that one a lot. What's your thoughts on PhD?
PhD is something that not everybody who can do one should. You should only do it for a few different reasons, right? So I think of what is the competitive advantage of PhD versus other things. For me, and you as well, it seems, you value options, having options. I did a PhD to maximize my optionality, right? It gave me a lot of wonderful skills. It let me meet a lot of wonderful people. And now with this little golden certificate in my hand, I could go wherever I want in the world. Immigration becomes easy with a good PhD. So whereas moving to Japan didn't work out in my early adulthood, now it would actually be trivial for me to move to Japan because of how they've changed the system. It'd be easy to move to Canada, easy to move to Australia, provided you could find a job, right? Relatively speaking, of course. I don't think I can literally pick up the phone and move there tomorrow, but you get what I mean. Like if I wanted to make it happen, I could. A PhD buys you that. A PhD lets you write your own ticket. But it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of 5+ years of your life, of key years to earn a lot of money. It can be a lonely road. You're isolated in your work. Try to make things happen to differentiate yourself from the other academics in your realm and try to get out papers, which are the coin of the realm. So it's a mixed bag. And then there's just a lot more than there was circa 2013 when I started my PhD and started on this journey. So had the likes of Microsoft and Google and Meta been around with the kinds of jobs that they have today back then, it is unclear to me that I would have joined a PhD program. I might have just gone straight into industry, making 6 figures right out of undergrad because I could. But then you could end up in a position where you are trapped. You are trapped making money for someone else's company, producing tremendous value for them, right? Like Google is the most profitable company I think that has ever existed in the history of the world. Per employee, I think they generate about $1.5 million of profit or revenue or something. So like to the extent that you're not being paid 7+ figures at Google, you're making them money. And that is value that you are not capturing. So you can end up becoming complacent in a sense, whereas academia forces you forward. You may have heard the term publish or perish. Mm-hmm. You are forced to keep climbing the ladder, to keep going up until I suppose you get tenure, at which point you could just fall off. But I'm not that kind of person. So I like that academia has a built-in structure and a built-in sense of urgency to some degree. It's a relaxed urgency that academia has because you could end up with projects at various stages of completion over many years, but you're always trying to do things and move things forward day by day. So
what motivates you to move those things forward other than survival?
It's not just about survival. It's because I want to know how these things work. I want to know how the world works. There's the thrill of discovery, of learning something new that no one else has ever known before the exact moment you press Shift Enter on your Jupyter Notebook cell and out comes a cool plot, right? That is a thrilling experience, at least for me, which shows how much of a nerd I am, I guess.
Which is a good thing. Like, I think that's the other thing that people don't maybe say outwardly is to just know yourself and love yourself. Like if you know that's what fascinates you and it's kind of cool that you get to do that every day, to just be fascinated by what you do. Not many people get to do that.
Yeah, and you get to choose, for the most part, you get to choose what you work on as well, what you find interesting. Mm-hmm. It's not like you get diktats from on high saying we need this presentation by 3 p.m. or else we're screwed, right? The clients won't be happy. Or we need to work on this feature because if we don't have this feature, we're dead in the water. You get to decide. You get a high degree of autonomy from a pretty early stage. Well, maybe not at every possible institution or in every possible field, but at least in my field, I felt like I had a lot of autonomy early. And I value that a lot.
What's the value of a postdoc?
The value of a postdoc is if you want to go become a professor.
Okay.
But otherwise, you go into industry right away.
Go into industry.
It could also be time to let you reskill or reframe yourself to be able to go into industry. That's what a postdoc is. A postdoc is a holding pattern. Imagine that you're in an airplane. You're a pilot of an airplane. You're trying to look for some way to land. A postdoc gives you time to circle around while the I don't know what you call them, the runways, while the runways are being cleared and opened up. That's what a postdoc.
That's pretty interesting. That's a cool analogy. I haven't thought about it that way. I didn't want to go do a postdoc when I was done. I was like, yeah, I'm done at school. I need to go.
If you don't want to be faculty, you don't have to. It would actually not be in your best interest.
Yeah, my motivation for finishing my PhD was that I could get to sleep whenever I want. That was my theory. Seriously. I would.
Do you get to sleep whenever you want now? My motivation for being in academia is I get to sleep whenever I want, as opposed to industry where I feel like I have to be there at 8 a.m., 8 to 5 or something, you know?
Yeah, technically, like if you work remote, if you unplug, you have certain hours you could unplug type thing. But yeah, this is interesting. How do you learn a new topic? What's your method of learning?
Ooh, generally it's I'm forced to do so, right? So this may come up later as you ask more questions, but have you heard of the drunkard search or the street light effect? No. So what is that? So imagine you're a policeman. You see someone under a street light looking for something, and you ask him, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm looking for my keys. And the policeman says, okay, I want to help you look for your keys. Where did you last see them? And he points like way over in the rest of the parking lot where it's completely dark. And he says, oh yeah, somewhere over there. And you look at him and you say, but why are you looking here then? And he says, well, because there's light here. I can see here. That's the drunkard search or the street light effect. I feel like in order to answer my questions, I will come up with questions of interest, and they're out in the dark. I can't see there. So I need to figure out how I can see there. I need to generate light there. And at that point, I go and I learn the thing I need, or I create the thing I need. So that's how I learn a new topic. I learn it because I'm forced to. If I don't learn it, then I can't do the thing I want to do. So then I will go and I will search through all over, and I'll ask my friends as well. I'll ask friends and collaborators, you know this thing. How did you learn this thing? And they'll tell me, and they'll point me to the books or the resources. And then I'll use those with a very strict eye towards accomplishing what I need. And I will literally learn only what I need to learn and no more for that need. I know myself at this point. I've tried learning things just because I'm interested or just because they look cool. And I never finish those courses. I never finish those books. But if I have an exact need for a project, I will learn that and I'll learn it well.
I don't think I've finished a course after I finished my PhD. I think my brain was just like, no more courses. No more. I don't care about us.
One of the joys of my PhD as well was that over the course of my whole PhD, I only did 4 courses. That was all that we had to do, just 4. What? Part of the reason I chose mine, yeah. People are like, oh, how come you like school so much? And I'm like, I really don't like school. And I really did almost no school. It was just working as a researcher.
Oh, that's, yeah. Okay, we had completely different experiences. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, what books do you recommend people read? 3.
3 books, all right. I always recommend, related to my own research, my advisor has a lovely book called Face Value. Okay. If you want to learn about the science of first impressions, the history of all this stuff, the history of judging people's faces, definitely take a look there. It is an underappreciated, underread book. It's written in simple language for lay people as well as scientists. You get something out of it no matter who you are approaching it. In terms of just like inspiring cognitive science-y kind of texts, there's always Gödel, Escher, Bach, GEB by Douglas Hofstadter. That's always an inspiring read about recursion and self-reference and consciousness and all kinds of things. Just like this fun thing to think about. And for fun, I I would say Three Body Problem. Three Body Problem by Liu Zixing. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but it's by a Chinese author, and it's science fiction. It's science fiction. It's actually going to be adapted by Netflix soon.
Oh, cool.
The trailer looks really, really cool. But it's about aliens. It's about alien invasions, but in a way that is very clever. The way that they deal with that, because it's you'll see. I don't want to spoil anything.
Okay. Sounds good. All right.
Yeah.
So you're stuck on an island, and you have a very specialized chef who can cook world-class meals, but they can only cook 2 of them. Which ones would you choose?
Oh my! Only 2 for the remainder of my life.
Yeah,
but they're amazing versions of them, right?
Yeah. You're on the island. Let's say you're on the island for about 5 to 10 years. You know, you're stuck with them.
Yeah. Honestly, I really like shepherd's pie. That's one of my favorite meals of all time.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's very simple, right? It's meat and potatoes. I could eat that infinitely, I think. So I'll take that, and I'll also take a nice grilled salmon and rice. I think I could live with that. Yeah. I could live with that. Because it's just 2, and I'm thinking through like how will my stomach deal with all kinds of different things, right? Otherwise, I would say roti and doubles for sure. But I don't think I could live off of that for every meal ad infinitum for 5 years.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
What's one thing that brings you joy?
One thing that brings me joy, honestly, it's seeing my mentees and my students succeed. That brings me so much joy when I get to hear they got the opportunity they wanted, or they got their thing published or something. That just brings the biggest smile to my face.
Well, one thing I've forgotten to ask you was, you've been at the top label institutions. So for instance, like if you watch the schools I went to Florida Institute of Technology. Ain't nobody talking about that on a grand scale, right? But Dartmouth, Yale, Princeton, the Booth School of Business, those are top schools. University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, that's another top school. So what have you learned by being at these top institutions that you can share with others? Especially in their way of thinking. I have a hypothesis about that.
That's interesting. When you say learn, do you mean learn about the people there, or just learned in terms of the culture?
More so, I think, what has been the benefit of you being at the top institutions in the world?
There have been many benefits. One benefit is feeling. So many people come to these kinds of institutions and they feel a deep sense of imposter syndrome, that they don't belong. I have never felt that places. These places have been awesome sources of peers, awesome sources of encouragement, awesome sources of untapping the potential within people here. I think that a key benefit of being at a place with a lot of resources like that, if you are willing to grab them, is a feeling of being limitless, is the sense that anything could be accomplished if you put your mind to it, because you've seen it done. You see in your mentors what can be achieved, and you think, how can I get to be like them? And you look at their career progression, and you see that it's it's like a stone rolling down a hill, or like an avalanche, like a snowball that becomes bigger and bigger. And so what that tells you is that if you could just start as a little snowball, you too can become a big world-destroying snowball if you just keep rolling. That was the big thing for me, is seeing that modeled by my mentors. Yeah.
That's insightful, because I visited Stanford, and I think one thing that I learned was that the sense of possibility in the average person was significantly higher. I would say orders of magnitude higher than I would have experienced with anybody that I knew at home where we lived. Like the average, even I would say even the most motivated people that I meet at home would have never exuded that type of confidence and sense of possibility. And that's what I really took away from maybe interacting with some of the West Coast institutions, West Coast companies. So it's cool to see that you maybe arrived at a fairly similar conclusion.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure you have stories of this back home, but I mean, when I was on my year off, I would tell people that I was close to about my goal, right? My goal was to go to an Ivy League institution in the States, maybe study abroad in Japan. And I would get laughed at, full on laughed at, belly laughed to my face by, people I'm really, really close to, and I'm still close to, right? People that I adore, people that I love. But there isn't the sense of possibility. Even if there is ambition in the Caribbean, even if there's talent, there isn't the sense that this is something that you can accomplish, that accomplishment is possible. And I just felt gaslit by that my whole life, in particular, like the last year that I was there. And I just felt really vindicated when I came here and found that, no, actually, things are possible. You can make things happen with phone calls. Simple phone calls or emails could make things happen. You could reach out to crazy people above your station and they will reply. And sometimes they'll meet with you and sometimes they'll give you opportunities. So, yeah, just believe in yourself a little bit, I guess, and you're in a place where most people believe in themselves. And the people that don't believe in themselves don't tend to make it, even if they have lots of talent.
Ooh, that's a good one. I guess my last question, what do you want people to remember about you?
Oh, in the future, I mean, assuming that this is at the end of one's lifespan, I would hope that people remember the work, whatever the body of work is at the end of it. That is what I hope to be my legacy. I would eventually also, I would like to have a scholarship set up in the family's name down the road that could at least fund one student in perpetuity from the Caribbean to go to somewhere like Dartmouth. That is like my ultimate dream. I feel like I'd accomplish everything in my life at that point if I could make that happen. To have like an endowed, infinitely renewable scholarship at Dartmouth to fund one ambitious student from Caribbean in the realm of technology. But yeah, that's down the road. I mean, I have nothing. I hope people remember me for at this point. I haven't accomplished 1/1000th of what I hope to do.
That's cool, man. Well, I appreciate. It's good to see you after all these years, and I think as I think back in our school days, we were a bunch of friggin' slackers. So
sure,
to see us actually become functioning professionals is a miracle on its own. If our teachers could see us now, and yeah, I definitely have a deep respect for our teachers just because they put up with a lot of shit, and I think they too could have pursued their own dreams and go beyond what a high school teacher, technically would have done. But I appreciate them staying to educate us, to give us a shot at something different.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about these levels of slackerism going on in our school. I mean, I was probably chief among them. I was barely there.
Yeah. So when I heard you had a PhD, I was like, is that real? And then I looked at the schools and like, how did that happen? And I'm sure people think the same of myself, in a good way, because we knew ourselves when we were not as focused.
That's right.
But it was good, man. You take care.
You too. You too. Right. You as well. This was a blast.
Yes.